Well, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. I'd like to begin with a moment of silence to remember those who've come before us in the struggle for justice. Just a brief moment of silence. Thank you. This poster was made by my daughter's first grade class, and hopefully you recognize the people pictured. And since we're here at a school with a social justice mission, I might add a couple images of St. Catherine Drexel and Dr. Norman Francis. And I like to think of these people as spiritual ancestors for those who continue to work for justice today. And beyond that metaphor, I'd like to point out that we all share a common ancestry. So bear with me for a moment. See, scientists believe that all humans alive today are descended from a single woman who lived in Africa some 100 to 200,000 years ago. So we are all quite literally related. And beyond that, if we go back about 60 million years ago, we find Purgatorius, a little tree-dwelling mammal, the probable ancestor of all primates. And if we can stretch our imagination far enough, scientists now believe that all life on Earth is descended from one single-celled organism that lived 3.5 billion years ago. So the point I'd like to make is that we are all a part of the Earth family. And this is what I call the planetary perspective, looking at the whole ecosphere and trying to encompass all of history. And I feel this perspective is crucial for understanding who we are and what is required of us. And it's from this perspective that I derive my notion of justice, which is pretty simple, that we come from the earth, we return to the earth, and for the short time that we're here on earth, we should share the earth with our fellow humans and all other species. Yet, of course, the tragic fact is that we often fail to do that. When resources and opportunities are not shared equally, social inequities and harsh disparities emerge, and the cost is suffering. This is injustice. These are the conditions that we struggle against. So what, you may ask, does this have to do with technology? Well, everything. Because one way of understanding the human story is through our use of tools. We were defined by our tools. We've used tools to change ourselves and our planet. And that's all that technology really is tools. And, we love our tools. But every tool, every invention, every new piece of technology also has a dark side and many hidden costs. The invention of the plow might seem like an unqualified good, but in fact, the rise of agricultural technology is associated with the emergence of class divisions. Archaeological evidence suggests that people working the fields were generally worse off in terms of health and nutrition than they were as hunter-gatherers. It was the emergent elite class that benefited from the new social order. The invention of the printing press is widely regarded as a positive development, leading to the democratization of knowledge and a more egalitarian dissemination of ideas. However, it also led to the rise of nationalism in Europe and India and to the rise of the nation-state. In the same vein, more recent innovations in information technology can be used by ordinary citizens to connect and communicate, but also by repressive elites for tracking and surveillance. And I'll be getting into the pitfalls and opportunities presented by social media in a bit. So again and again, the key question with technology is, will it be used for liberation versus social control? And quite often it's used for both. The chain is a fitting metaphor. This technology can be used in various machines to do work. For example, I take my daughter to school every day on a bicycle, and it wouldn't function without the chain that converts the circular motion of the pedals into the forward motion of the bicycle. But chains can also be used to restrict, to constrain, to enslave. And so it is with most technology. Historically, technology shows a story of progress, at least in terms of complexity and power. especially when we look at computing technology over the last century. Gordon Moore, one of the founders of Intel, observed that the number of transistors in a dense integrated circuit doubles approximately every year. And this has become known as Moore's law, although it's actually just an observation, it's not a natural law. Nevertheless, it's proven true so far, and as a consequence, computing power has doubled at an exponential rate throughout our lifetimes, with profound impact on virtually every sphere of human endeavor all around the world. And you may have seen in the news recently that Intel expects this trend to continue through 2018 at least, with the development of 10 nanometer chips and eventually 7 nanometer chips. But does this technological progress correlate to social progress? Of course, social progress is much messier, much more complex, much more contested, and much more difficult to define. So one common measure is to look at the world average gross domestic product per capita. That's the total value of all goods and services produced each year, divided by the number of people in the world and plotted on a grid over time. So you'll notice that it rises over time and pretty steeply over the last century, which might suggest a correlation with high-tech innovation. However, this graph does not show the distribution of wealth, which is another story entirely. According to economist James S. Henry, 81% of the world's wealth is owned by just 0.1% of the global population, while the remaining 99.9% of us share just 19% of the wealth. It would be interesting to see how this chart has changed over time, but I haven't been able to find that research. Let's zoom in on the last little bit of our history and consider how technology and justice interact with the rise of the internet. We might call this topic digital activism or internet activism and so forth. Some definitions are in order, and these are very basic. Activism is simply efforts to promote social, political, economic, or environmental change. In this context, the word digital, of course, digital means ones and zeros, right? But in this context, it's a shorthand for computer-mediated or especially internet-mediated. So digital activism is the way that citizens use digital media or technology to make social, political, or environmental change. And this mode of action has a powerful allure. An overwhelming majority of national advocacy groups see social media as essential to contemporary advocacy work and social movements, and laud its democratizing function, according to some recent research. To understand some of the power and the potential of digital activism, I'm going to run through a quick history of a dozen key campaigns. The first instance of digital activism may have taken place in 1990 when a software company devised a plan to sell a database of consumer information on CD-ROM, a collection of names, addresses, and telephone numbers for over 80 million US households, presumably of interest to junk mailers and telemarketers. So an online campaign was mounted on Usenet. Does anybody know what Usenet is? Yeah, okay, I see like one person. Before the rise of the World Wide Web, people communicated on news groups on something called Usenet, and also on other computer bulletin boards and so forth. So the internet was around before the web was invented. Anyway, a campaign was mounted online. 30,000 concerned citizens contacted Lotus to express their displeasure, and the database product was canceled. Does anybody know what DDoS stands for? DDoS, anybody? No, not a single hand? Okay, it's a distributed denial of service attack is when a server is flooded with requests which aim to overwhelm the host. So on Guy Fawkes Day in 1994, one of the first such attacks was launched against British government servers in protest of anti-rave legislation. And since that time, the Guy Fawkes mask, you see it there, has become kind of symbolic for the online group known as Anonymous, which has perpetrated many similar acts of hacktivism. People's Global Action was launched in 1998 at protests in Geneva, Switzerland. The PGA is not to be confused with the golf thing. The PGA is not an organization per se, but a decentralized coordination of anti-globalization campaigns coordinated over the internet. 1998 was also the year that MoveOn.org was launched. MoveOn.org is an American policy advocacy group and political action committee which now claims 7 million members, and it started off as an email group, and it's still kind of a huge presence online. In 1999, the Independent Media Network was founded to provide journalistic coverage of the protests against the World Trade Organization meeting in Seattle. Today, there are over 150 independent media centers around the world, and they define themselves as a network of collectively run media outlets for the creation of radical, accurate, and passionate tellings of truth. So much for ancient history. Getting into this current millennium, some of those early digital campaigns that I just went over were noted for their lack of racial diversity and for their overwhelming whiteness. But that changed in 2007 with the protests in Jena, Louisiana, and the particulars of the case revolved around 6 African-American teenagers who beat up a white student and were charged with attempted murder in a general environment of racial tension. And there's a lot more to it than that, but eventually thousands of people around the country converged on Jena to protest what they saw as disproportionate, racially motivated treatment of the Jena 6. But what's not so well known is that this is an example of grassroots digital activism. So the journalist Howard Witt called it a civil rights protest conjured out of the ether of cyberspace. And Greg Mathis, yes, that's Judge Mathis, wrote that young black people played a key role in promoting the march and rally on social networking sites such as Facebook and MySpace. Their organizing style may not look like that of years past, but it is real and it is effective. WikiLeaks is an organization that's devoted to making secret documents public via the internet. And they've actually been around since 2006, but probably made their biggest splash in 2010 when they began publishing a set of documents leaked by a US Army private who's now serving a sentence. At over 250,000 documents, over 250 million words, WikiLeaks has claimed that this is the largest release of classified materials in the history of the world. Starting in December of 2010, a wave of unrest, ranging from protests to revolution to civil war, spread through Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Bahrain, Syria, Algeria, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Morocco, Israel, and Sudan, and more. This has been called the Arab Spring, with social media playing a key role both in organizing insurgencies, but also in state repression of those insurgencies. Does anybody remember Coney 2012? Not too many people, just, okay, now we're seeing some more hands. Okay, well that makes sense because this is recent enough. Hopefully I don't need to explain it too much. I'll just note that this campaign revolved around a video produced by Invisible Children Incorporated, a video that's gotten over 100 million views, which Time magazine called the most viral video ever, with some statistics showing that over half of young American adults had seen it within days of its release. So I'm not going to get into some of the problems and complexities associated with the campaign. But that brings us up to last year, 2014. In mid-April, 276 young female students were kidnapped in Nigeria by a group of terrorists called Boko Haram. The name Boko Haram, does anybody know what it means, the name?
Education is forbidden or education is not forbidden.
Western education is forbidden. Anyway, the Bring Back Our Girls hashtag has been retweeted 2.3 million times just by May 11th of 2014. By the way, just as a follow-up, 219 of the girls remain in captivity. According to a report in the Hamilton Spectator, the Boko Haram extremist group sees the mass kidnapping as a shining symbol of success and has abducted hundreds of other girls, boys, and women since then. It's also reported that 10,000 people have been killed in the larger conflict in the last year alone. On August 9th of last year, an unarmed African-American teenager named Michael Brown was shot and killed by a white police officer, Darren Wilson. The next day, there were protests, and these quickly spread across the country, and these protests have been cited as an example of how quickly social media can mobilize people at the grassroots level. Joshua Tucker of NYU noted that going forward, we almost always will see social media usage associated with protests. So these have been some very high-profile campaigns, and we can agonize a lot about whether or not they're effective. That's the reason I was citing some of the statistics about how many of those girls are still in captivity. Was that campaign effective? But meanwhile, I would also like to point out, besides these high-profile campaigns, social media is just a part of the toolkit for any activism today. and that there are an uncountable number of smaller campaigns going on right now, every day, using social media to organize. And I'll cite just two examples. At another campus, not too far from here, students have been organizing a campaign to demand their university divest from fossil fuels. And this is part of a national movement. And of course, they're using social media, so you can follow them on Twitter, you can like them on Facebook, just look for divest Tulane. Having a presence on these social media is just now standard practice for activists. Or to give an even more recent example from the last few days, some concerned citizens have been using social media to organize their opposition to a golf course in City Park. So this course had been abandoned since Katrina, and many had come to cherish a little bit of wilderness in the city. As a friend of mine wrote, I bring my 2 children here for urban hikes all the time. I spend so much time in the park now that there is this tiny jewel of wilderness in the middle of the city. I feel so lucky to be able to walk those paths and trails. It's a secret garden to me and an endless forest to my children. Please do not take it away and replace it with an exclusive, boring lawn of endless poisoned green. We want parks to be there for our children and families. There are places to hush the loud frenzy of our busy city lives, places to play, relax, get lost, and find ourselves. Not places for wealthier people to hit plastic balls from here to there. Please keep the green heart of our city alive. Please protect and preserve the wilderness in City Park. We don't want or need another golf course. And these citizens used social media to plan what they'd say at a public hearing, which took place last night, to coordinate contact with the press, and of course there's now an online petition, which has 564 signatures as of 10 a.m. this morning. As with any other strategies for social change, of course, digital activism has its pitfalls. It's attracted a share of criticism, and we'll need to be cognizant of these if we plan to engage in digital activism ourselves. For one thing, there's the danger of information overload. Though through the internet we can discover a truly staggering number of worthy causes, leading us to feel overwhelmed and helpless. Furthermore, people do not have equal access to information technology resources, a disparity which is especially evident on the global scale. Internet usage skews toward a demographic that is white, middle class, and centered on the so-called developed world and the industrialized global north. As a result, online dialogue can function like an echo chamber, reflecting back views that we already agree with. And further aggravating this phenomenon, search engines like Google, in an effort to show us the most relevant information, customize search results on an individual basis. As a result, our inherent tendency to confirm our own bias is exaggerated and we may become oblivious to reality. Indeed, one of the major fears with digital activism is that people will become so caught up in the cyber realm that they'll fail to take action in the real world. And, as alluded to earlier, powerful elites can use the same technology to track activists, to censor them, to shut them down. There are also a couple of criticisms that I'd like to consider. These are not exactly pitfalls, they're still subject for debate. For example, digital activism is often criticized as slacktivism, which is the idea of encouraging little actions that support great big causes. And some researchers have called these token displays of support. So one example might be Earth Hour, which is a global campaign to encourage people to turn off the lights for an hour, 60 minutes, once per year. The energy savings of this action is really not that big. But then again, that's not the point. Proponents would argue that it's about consciousness raising, giving people a little something to do that could get them thinking in new ways and eventually lead to something bigger. And as Mary Joyce says, slacktivism is like a first kiss. A first kiss doesn't make a baby, but you got to start somewhere. A related critique is associated with the term clicktivism, although some people use this as another word for digital activism. So this applies to big, well-organized digital activist campaigns, such as those mounted by MoveOn.org or more recently, Avaz. And I'll read this diatribe from Micah White, who's one of the founders of Occupy Wall Street. The trouble is that this model of activism uncritically embraces the ideology of marketing. It accepts that the tactics of advertising and market research used to sell toilet paper can also build social movements. This manifests itself as in an inordinate faith in the power of metrics to quantify success. Thus, everything digital activists do is meticulously monitored and analyzed. The obsession with tracking clicks turns digital activism into clicktivism. All right, so I'm going to assume that you all here today, are tough, that you haven't been discouraged by all this negativity. And I want to run through some very basic tips on how one might engage in digital activism effectively. First, and you might think it goes without saying, but it does help to have a plan. Start with an idea, a goal, a desire, get together with some people who agree with you, sketch out a basic plan, and put it into action. Having a clearly defined sense of who your audience is also helpful. Maybe it's your fellow Xavier students, maybe the whole Xavier community, maybe your neighborhood, the city of New Orleans, the state of Louisiana, the whole world. But the bigger your audience, of course, the harder they are to know and the harder they are to address. Framing your message is a complex task. But basically, it involves telling the larger story in which your action, your campaign is situated. So if you don't cook up and propagate your own narrative, others will do it for you. In fact, they probably will anyway. But you've got a better chance if you think this through. And build your network. If this is kind of obvious, social media is all about building networks. It helps to have some compelling content to share over those networks. Invisible Children had the Coney 2012 movie. You may not have a budget for a slick production, but that's not necessary. Even a well-thought-out slogan counts as a form of content. And here you have the opportunity to work with artists to create digital content. So for example, Jamie R. Jones, a Xavier student, created this piece of artwork. It's very compelling. It's called Formation. Every one of those dog tags represents an American soldier who was killed in Iraq. So he created that artwork. I didn't. But then I took a photo of him and I put it online and shared it. So that's an example of how you can work with artists in the community and create digital content that can be shared on networks. Of course, track your reach. Most social media tools have analytic reporting capabilities, so you can do this without, of course, forgetting about the real people behind the numbers and falling into the trap of clicktivism. And finally, it may seem odd, but I want to caution you to take care of yourself. Digital activism can be rewarding and exciting, but if you succeed in making a difference in the world, you may find yourself under stress, even under attack. So be careful what you share. Be cognizant of safety and privacy issues, and practice mindfulness. Technological innovation and social progress imply an orientation to the future, so I wanted to sum up this presentation with a look forward. You'll remember those charts of technological progress with a strong upward trend over the last century, the charts I showed at the beginning of this presentation. The bad news is that those trends are also correlated with the extraction of non-renewable fossil fuel resources, a process which is not sustainable. In fact, there are numerous reasons to think that the unprecedented growth of the last 150 years cannot continue indefinitely. And as resources are depleted, the economy may contract with consequences that may be quite dire. Whatever the exact timing and interaction of these complex trends is the subject of extensive debate, but what's clear is that complacency is not an option. The good news is that it's a great time to be an activist. If you're looking for problems to solve, it's a world of opportunity. The Millennium Project has identified 15 global challenges, including, for example, how can sustainable development be achieved for all while addressing global climate change? How can everyone have sufficient clean water without conflict? How can population growth and resources be brought into balance? How can genuine democracy emerge from authoritarian regimes, and so on? The problems are complex and will not be solved easily. So, my final exhortation to all of you is simply this: be revolutionary. I mean, study hard, hit the books, get good grades, graduate, and do all of that, but above all, be revolutionary. Recognize your place from a planetary perspective, realize your moment in the global historical context, awaken to your full potential, and act accordingly. Never let yourself be overwhelmed or intimidated by the magnitude of the manifold challenges facing our species. The future is calling us to greatness. The future is calling you to greatness. The future desperately needs you to take action for justice. So find your cause, join with others, choose your technology wisely, and be revolutionary. Thank you.